The summer air hung thick and warm that evening as 16-year-old Elena Martinez smoothed down her new sundress. She had saved for months from her part-time job at the local bookstore to buy it. Tonight was the annual Rivera family reunion, and for the first time, she felt like she was stepping into young adulthood, rather than tagging along as someone's kid. Her mother, Patricia, 42 years old with streaks of premature silver threading through her dark hair, was rushing around their small apartment trying to find her car keys. Elena's younger sister, 12-year-old Sophia, sat on the couch painting her nails a bright coral color, humming along to music only she could hear through her headphones. "Elena, mija, can you check if I left my keys in the bathroom?" Patricia called out, her voice carrying that familiar edge of stress that seemed to live permanently in their home since Elena's father had left 3 years ago. Elena found the keys on the bathroom counter, right next to her mother's worn makeup bag. She grabbed them and headed back to the living room, where Patricia was now frantically searching through her purse. "Here, Mom," Elena said softly, dangling the keys. Patricia looked up, relief flooding her face. "What would I do without you?" She pulled Elena into a quick hug, and Elena caught the scent of her mother's drugstore perfume, the same one she had worn for years because it was affordable and lasted. "Can we go now?" Sophia whined, finally pulling out one earbud. "Aunt Carmen said there would be a chocolate fountain." Patricia laughed, the sound easing some of the tension in the room. "Yes, we can go now. Everyone in the car." The drive to Aunt Carmen's house took about 20 minutes, winding through neighborhoods that gradually became nicer, the houses larger, the lawns more manicured. Aunt Carmen had married well, as Patricia's mother never failed to mention, though usually with a tone that suggested Patricia had somehow failed by comparison. Elena watched the streetlights blur past her window, thinking about the boy from her English class who had smiled at her yesterday. Miguel. He had dark eyes and a quiet confidence that made her stomach flip. She wondered if he would be at the party, though she knew it was silly. This was family only, the Rivera clan gathering like they did every year to celebrate being together, to share food and stories and pretend for one evening that life was simple and good. When they pulled up to Aunt Carmen's house, the driveway was already crowded with cars. Music drifted from the backyard, and Elena could see colored lights strung up between the trees. "Remember?" Patricia said, turning to look at both her daughters before they got out. "Be polite, say thank you. And Sophia, please don't eat so much chocolate that you get sick like last year." Sophia rolled her eyes but nodded. Inside, the house was chaos in the best way. Cousins running around, uncles arguing good-naturedly about baseball, aunts clustered in the kitchen sharing gossip and recipes. The air smelled like carne asada and fresh tortillas, and Elena's stomach growled despite the nervousness fluttering there. "Elena!" Her cousin Rosa, who was 14, grabbed her arm. "Come on, everyone's outside by the pool." Elena glanced back at her mother, who waved her on with a smile. Patricia had already been pulled into conversation with Elena's grandmother, a tiny woman with sharp eyes who was probably already asking why Patricia was still single. The backyard was transformed. White lights hung everywhere, casting a soft glow over the pool and patio. A long table groaned under the weight of food. And yes, there was indeed a chocolate fountain that Sophia was already gravitating toward. Elena spent the next hour moving between groups, catching up with cousins she only saw a few times a year, laughing at her uncle's terrible jokes, and helping Aunt Carmen bring out more food. It was easy to lose herself in the warmth of family, to feel like she belonged to something bigger than their small apartment and her mother's tired eyes. Around 8 o'clock, her mother found her near the pool. "Elena, I need to ask you a favor," Patricia said, and something in her voice made Elena pay attention. "Your Aunt Carmen and I are going to the spa tomorrow. She bought a package for both of us, and the appointment is at noon. I need you to watch Sophia while we're gone." "The spa?" Elena tried to keep the surprise out of her voice. Her mother never did things like that, never spent money on herself. I know, Patricia said, a small smile playing at her lips. But Carmen insisted, and honestly, I could use a few hours to relax. "You don't mind, do you?" "Of course not, Mom, that's great." Patricia squeezed her shoulder. "You're a good girl, Elena. I don't tell you that enough." The words settled warm in Elena's chest. and she smiled back. Her mother didn't often show affection through words. Worn down as she was by long shifts at the hospital where she worked as a nurse's aide, every moment of softness felt precious. "I'm going to head home early," Patricia continued. "I have a headache starting, and I want to be rested for tomorrow. Can you and Sophia catch a ride with Uncle Marco? He said he's leaving around 10. "Sure, Mom. Feel better." Patricia kissed her forehead and went to find Sophia to say goodbye. Elena watched her mother move through the crowd, stopping to hug relatives, and felt a surge of love mixed with something like sadness. Her mother worked so hard, gave so much, and asked for so little in return. The party continued, growing louder as the night deepened. Someone turned up the music, and her younger cousins started an impromptu dance competition. Elena found herself laughing more freely than she had in weeks, the stress of school and homework and her part-time job fading away. It was close to 10 when Elena realized she should find Sophia and Uncle Marco. She checked inside the house first, then made her way back outside, scanning the crowd. She finally spotted Sophia near the dessert table, thankfully not covered in chocolate this time. "Come on," Elena said, taking her sister's hand. "Time to go home." "Already?" Sophia protested, but she didn't pull away. They found Uncle Marco by the front gate, saying his goodbyes. He was a jovial man in his 50s, with a belly that suggested he never met a meal he didn't love, and a laugh that could fill a room. "Ready, girls?" he asked, jingling his keys. "Thanks for the ride, Uncle Marco," Elena said as they climbed into his truck. "Anything for my favorite nieces," he replied, though he said that to all his nieces. The drive home was quieter than the drive there had been. Sophia dozed off in the back seat, and Uncle Marco hummed along to the oldies station he always listened to. Elena stared out the window again, watching the neighborhoods change back from nice to modest to slightly worn, the landscape of her real life. They were about 5 minutes from home when it happened. Later, Elena would try to remember the exact sequence of events, but it would always come back in fragments, like a film reel with missing frames. There was the sudden blare of a horn, Uncle Marco shouting something, the truck swerving hard to the left, then impact, metal shrieking against metal, glass shattering, and the world tumbling sideways. The sound was enormous, filling every space until there was nothing else. Then, just as suddenly, silence. Elena opened her eyes, not remembering when she had closed them. Everything hurt, a distant ringing in her ears making it hard to think. She was pressed against the door. The truck tilted at an odd angle, warm liquid dripped down her face, and when she touched it, her fingers came away red. "Sophia?" Her voice came out hoarse, barely a whisper. She tried again, louder. "Sophia, I'm okay," came a small, frightened voice from the back. "Elena, I'm scared." "It's okay, baby. We're okay." Elena wasn't sure that was true, but she said it anyway, the way her mother always did when Sophia had nightmares. Uncle Marco was slumped over the steering wheel, not moving. Elena's heart lurched with fear, but then she saw his chest rising and falling, unconscious but breathing. The driver's side door was suddenly wrenched open, and someone was reaching in, voices urgent and overlapping. "Don't move, just stay still. Ambulance is coming, can you hear me? What's your name?" Elena tried to answer, tried to make sense of what was happening, but everything felt far away and close at the same time. More hands, carefully opening her door, someone speaking to her in a calm, steady voice about staying still, about help being on the way. Time moved strangely. The ambulance arrived, sirens wailing, lights painting everything in harsh red and blue. EMTs moved efficiently, checking Uncle Marco first, then Sophia, then Elena. She heard someone say something about a drunk driver, about running a red light, but the words didn't quite connect to anything real. They put Elena on a stretcher, and that's when the pain really hit, sharp and specific in her left side. She gasped, and the EMT hovering over her murmured something reassuring that Elena couldn't quite catch. Sophia was crying now, being checked by another EMT. Uncle Marco was conscious, disoriented, but talking. Elena wanted to go to her sister to hold her and promise everything would be fine, but she couldn't move. The hospital was a blur of harsh fluorescent lights and antiseptic smells. Doctors and nurses moved around her, asking questions, poking and prodding. Someone cut off her new sundress, and she felt a pang of loss even through the pain. She had been so happy wearing it just hours ago. They ran tests, x-rays, a CT scan. Words like internal bleeding and emergency surgery floated around her, but Elena couldn't quite grasp them. She kept asking about Sophia, and finally, a kind nurse with gray hair pulled back in a bun told her that Sophia was fine, just bruised and scared, and that someone had called her mother. Patricia arrived like a whirlwind, her face pale and drawn, still in the clothes she had worn to the party. She went to Elena first, taking her hand, her own trembling. "Mija, oh my God, Mija." "I'm okay, Mom," Elena said, though she didn't feel okay. Everything hurt, and there was a gnawing fear in her gut that something was very wrong. A doctor appeared, young and serious, with wire-rimmed glasses and a clipboard. Dr. Harrison, his badge read, "Mrs. Martinez?" he asked, and Patricia nodded. "I'm glad you're here. Your daughter has sustained significant internal injuries. There's bleeding that we need to address immediately. We're recommending emergency surgery to repair the damage and stop the bleeding." Patricia's face went even paler. "Surgery? How serious is it?" "Very serious, I'm afraid. Without intervention, the bleeding could become life-threatening. We need to operate as soon as possible." Elena felt her mother's hand tighten around hers. She looked up at Patricia's face and saw something there she had never seen before, something that looked almost like panic. "What are the risks?" Patricia asked, her voice tight. Dr. Harrison launched into an explanation of surgical risks. Anesthesia, recovery time, Elena. I tried to follow, but the pain was making it hard to concentrate. She heard words like complications and small percentage and should be fine, but it was the hesitation in her mother's face that frightened her most. "Mom?" Elena whispered. Patricia looked down at her, and for a moment, Elena saw her mother as she really was, stripped of all the armor she wore to get through each day. She saw fear and exhaustion, and something else, something desperate. "I need a moment," Patricia said to the doctor. "Can I have a moment with my daughter?" Dr. Harrison nodded, though he looked concerned. "Of course, but please, time is important here." When he left, Patricia sat on the edge of Elena's bed. She was still holding Elena's hand, but her grip had loosened, and she was staring at something Elena couldn't see. "Mom, what's wrong? Why aren't they doing the surgery?" Patricia was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was so soft Elena had to strain to hear it. "Elena, I need to tell you something, and I need you to understand." She paused, swallowing hard. "We don't have insurance right now. I lost my job 2 months ago. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to worry. I've been looking for work, but nothing's come through yet, and our COBRA payments were too expensive to keep up." Elena felt like the world had tilted again, like she was back in that truck spinning out of control. "What does that mean?" "It means the surgery will cost more money than I have. More money than I can borrow. The hospital wants a deposit before they'll operate, and I don't have it." The words hung in the air between them. Impossible and terrible. "But they have to help me," Elena said, hearing the fear in her own voice. "They can't just let me die because we don't have money." "They'll stabilize you," Patricia said, and her voice broke on the words. "They'll keep you alive. But the surgery, the one that will actually fix the bleeding, they need payment arrangements for that." Elena stared at her mother, trying to understand what she was hearing. She thought about the chocolate fountain and the white lights and her cousin Rosa laughing. She thought about Miguel from English class and whether she would ever see him again. She thought about all the things she had taken for granted, like waking up tomorrow. "There has to be something," Elena whispered. "Mom, please." Patricia was crying now, silent tears running down her face. "If you die," she said, and the words came out strangled. "If you die, let me know. I don't have time for paperwork." Elena felt like she had been struck. The words didn't make sense. Her mother, who had raised her and Sophia alone, who worked double shifts to keep food on the table, who had just that evening kissed her forehead and called her a good girl, was saying if she died to just let her know because paperwork was inconvenient. "Mom," Elena said, and she was crying too now. "What are you saying?" "I can't lose you," Patricia continued, as if she hadn't heard. But I also can't pay for this. Do you understand? I have Sophia to think about too. If I bankrupt us for your surgery, what happens to her? How do I feed her? How do we live? The cruelty of the choice hung between them. Elena wanted to scream, to rage against the unfairness of it all, but she was 16 and scared, and in more pain than she had ever felt in her life. Dr. Harrison returned, his expression grave. Mrs. Martinez, we really need to make a decision. Your daughter's condition is deteriorating. Patricia stood up, releasing Elena's hand. She looked at the doctor, then back at Elena, her face a mask of anguish. If she dies, let me know, Patricia said again, her voice hollow. I don't have time for paperwork. When I woke up, the record said Nule. Gal Guardian. The words made no sense. Elena tried to understand, to find the logic in them, but there was none. Just fear and desperation and a system so broken that a mother had to choose between saving her daughter's life and keeping a roof over her other daughter's head. Then, into that moment of despair, something shifted. The hospital room door opened again, and Aunt Carmen walked in, still in her party clothes, her face flushed from running. Patricia, I just heard, she said, breathless. Marco called me from his hospital room. Why aren't they operating? Carmen, please, not now, Patricia said, but there was no strength in her voice. Not now? Carmen looked between her sister and her niece, understanding dawning in her eyes. Oh, Patricia, the money. Patricia nodded, unable to speak. Carmen pulled out her phone. How much? Carmen, I can't ask you to do that, Patricia said, but she was already reaching out, hope flickering in her eyes like a candle in the dark. You're not asking. I'm offering. How much do they need? Dr. Harrison named a figure that made Elena dizzy. It was more money than she could imagine, more than her mother made in 6 months. Carmen didn't hesitate. She made a call, spoke to someone in rapid Spanish too quick for Elena to follow, then held out the phone to Dr. Harrison. My bank. They'll verify the transfer. Please help my niece. The next hour was a blur of activity. Consent forms signed, surgical prep, Patricia finally pulling herself together enough to kiss Elena's forehead one more time before they wheeled her away. I'm sorry, Patricia whispered. I'm so sorry, mija. I was scared. I didn't know what to do. Elena wanted to say something, to forgive her or condemn her or understand her, but they were already moving, the ceiling tiles passing overhead in a steady rhythm. And then there was the anesthesiologist telling her to count backward from 10. She made it to 7. When Elena woke up, everything was fuzzy around the edges. She was in a different room, smaller and quieter. Machines beeped steadily nearby. Her throat hurt, and her side was a dull throb instead of the sharp agony from before. Elena? Sophia's voice, small and scared. Elena turned her head slowly and saw her sister in a chair beside the bed, her eyes red from crying. Behind her stood Aunt Carmen, and in the corner, slumped in an uncomfortable-looking plastic chair, was Patricia. Hey, Sophia Bear, Elena croaked, her voice rough. I'm okay. Sophia burst into fresh tears and carefully hugged her sister, avoiding the 4 lines and bandages. I thought you were going to die. Mom said you might die. Elena met her mother's eyes over Sophia's head. Patricia looked like she had aged 10 years in a single night. There was something broken in her face, something that might never quite heal. The surgery went well, Aunt Carmen said, stepping forward. Dr. Harrison said you were very lucky. Another hour and it could have been much worse. Thank you, Elena whispered, looking at her aunt. Thank you for helping me. Carmen smiled, but it was sad. Your family, mija. That's what family does. The unspoken rebuke hung in the air. That's what family does. Not weigh the cost of saving a life against the inconvenience of paperwork. Patricia stood up slowly and came to the bedside. She looked like she wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she just stood there, tears streaming down her face, one hand hovering near Elena but not quite touching her. Mom, Elena said, and she wasn't sure if she was offering forgiveness or asking for an explanation. I was scared, Patricia finally said. I was so scared, Elena. Not just about the money, about everything. About losing you, about what would happen to Sophia, about Ho. We would survive. I wasn't thinking clearly. I just kept seeing everything falling apart, and I froze. You said if I died to let you know. Elena said quietly. You said you didn't have time for paperwork. Patricia flinched as if struck. I know what I said, and I will have to live with that for the rest of my life. But Elena, you have to understand, in that moment, I wasn't your mother. I was just a terrified woman who couldn't see any way forward. I'm not making excuses. What I said was unforgivable. But I need you to know that I love you more than anything in this world. Elena closed her eyes. She was 16 years old, lying in a hospital bed because of an accident that wasn't her fault, being asked to understand choices that no child should ever have to understand. The record said new legal guardian, Elena said, the words her mother had spoken finally making sense. You were going to let Aunt Carmen take me. That's what you meant, wasn't it? You were giving me up so I could get the surgery. Patricia nodded, sinking back into her chair. I thought if Carmen was your legal guardian, she could authorize the surgery. She has insurance, she has money. I thought it was the only way to save you without destroying everything for Sophia. The room was silent except for the steady beep of the heart monitor. Elena looked at each of them in turn. Sophia still clinging to her hand, Aunt Carmen, watching with sad, knowing eyes. Patricia, broken and ashamed and still trying to be strong. That's the most horrible thing I've ever heard, Elena said finally. And also maybe the most loving. Patricia looked up, surprise in her eyes. I don't forgive you yet, Elena continued. I don't think I can right now. Maybe not for a long time. But I think I understand. You were trying to save both of us and there was no good way to do it. Elena, you're 16, Carmen S. Aid gently. You don't have to understand this. You don't have to forgive it. Your mother made choices out of fear and desperation, and those choices hurt you. I know, Elena said, but I also know what it's like to be scared, and I know Mom's been carrying everything alone for so long. She looked at Patricia. You don't have to do that anymore. We're family, we help each other. Sophia nodded emphatically. I can get a job, I'm 12, I can do something. No, Patricia said firmly, some of her old strength returning. No, you're a child. Both of you are still children. This is my responsibility. Then let us help carry it, Elena said. And let Aunt Carmen help too. Pride isn't worth dying over. The four of them stayed like that for a while, sitting in the small hospital room, not fixing anything but at least being together. Eventually, a nurse came in to check Elena's vitals and shoo the visitors out so Elena could rest. Elena spent 5 days in the hospital. The physical healing was straightforward, the doctors said, though she would have scars. The emotional healing was more complicated. She and Patricia had long conversations in the quiet hours when Sophia was at school and Aunt Carmen had gone home. They talked about fear and money and the impossible choices poverty forced on people. They talked about the ways the system was broken, about how medical debt crushed families, about how a single accident could destroy everything you had built. Patricia apologized more times than Elena could count, and slowly, day by day, Elena began to forgive. Not because what her mother had said was okay, but because she finally understood the weight her mother had been carrying all these years, the constant calculation of resources and needs, the math that never quite added up. When Elena was finally discharged, Aunt Carmen drove them home. Their small apartment looked the same, but felt different, like Elena was seeing it through new eyes. This was what her mother had been fighting to keep. This was what Sophia needed. This place, humble as it was their home. Over the following months, things changed. Patricia found a new job, one with better pay and benefits. Carmen helped them navigate the insurance system and set up payment plans for the remaining medical debt. Elena went back to school, though she was behind in her classes and had to work hard to catch up. Miguel from her English class did ask her out eventually, and she said yes, and they went to the movies and held hands in the dark. But when he asked about the scars, she told him the truth. All of it, and he listened without judgment. Years later, when Elena was in college studying social work, she would think back to that night often. Not just the accident, but everything that came after. The impossible choice her mother had faced, the kindness of her aunt, the brutality of a system that forced families to choose between health and financial survival. She would use her mother's story, with permission, in her classes and papers. She would advocate for healthcare reform and better social safety nets. She would remember what it felt like to be 16 and scared, and to hear the person who loved you most in the world say, "If you die, let me know, because I don't have time for paperwork." But she would also remember the love underneath the fear. The way her mother had tried to find a solution, however flawed. The way Aunt Carmen had stepped in without hesitation. The way Sophia had wanted to get a job at 12 to help. The way they had all pulled together in the end. Elena never forgot that summer night. How could she? It had changed everything. But in the years that followed, she learned something important. People are complicated, and love doesn't always look the way you expect it. Sometimes love is desperate and afraid, and makes terrible choices. Sometimes love is a aunt writing a check without thinking twice. Sometimes love is a 12-year-old girl offering to give up her childhood to help. And sometimes love is a 16-year-old girl in a hospital bed, choosing to understand instead of hate, choosing to forgive instead of hold on to anger, choosing to see her mother not as a villain, but as a fellow human being doing her best in an impossible situation. On Elena's graduation day, when she walked across the stage to receive her master's in social work, both Patricia and Carmen were in the audience cheering. Sophia, now studying to be a nurse, sat between them. Elena looked out at her family and smiled, thinking about how far they had all come from that terrible night. After the ceremony, Patricia pulled Elena aside. "I'm so proud of you, mija," she said, and her voice was thick with emotion. "Look at what you've become." "I learned from the best," Elena said, and she meant it. "You showed me what it means to fight for the people you love, even when the fight is impossible. You showed me that being human means making mistakes and trying to be better." Patricia wiped her eyes. "I almost lost you that night. Not just to the accident, but to my own fear." "But you didn't," Elena said, taking her mother's hand. "We're still here, we're still together. That's what matters." They stood there for a moment, mother and daughter, survivors of a night that could have destroyed them but instead had taught them both about the complicated nature of love and sacrifice and forgiveness. The summer sun was warm on their faces, and somewhere in the crowd Sophia was arguing with Aunt Carmen about where to go for the celebration dinner. It was ordinary and beautiful and precious, this life they had built together from the broken pieces of that night. Elena thought about the girl she had been at 16, lying in a hospital bed, trying to understand the incomprehensible. She wished she could tell that girl that it would all be okay, that the scars would fade, that love would prove stronger than fear in the end. But maybe that girl already knew, maybe in choosing understanding over anger, forgiveness over resentment, that 16-year-old Elena had already understood the most important lesson. We are all doing the best we can with what we have, and sometimes grace is the only thing that saves us. The celebration dinner was loud and joyful, full of laughter and too much food, and Carmen insisting on ordering the most expensive champagne. Elena sat surrounded by her family, these people who had carried her through the darkest night of her life, and felt grateful for every difficult day that had led to this moment. She raised her glass when Carmen proposed a toast. "To Elena," her aunt said, "who turned tragedy into purpose, fear into strength, and showed us all what real courage looks like." They drank, and Elena caught her mother's eye across the table. Patricia smiled, and in that smile was everything they had been through together and everything they had learned. It wasn't forgetting, it wasn't pretending the past hadn't happened. It was acknowledgement and acceptance and the choice to move forward together. That night, lying in bed in her small apartment, Elena thought about the story of her accident and what it meant. Not just the physical scars she would carry forever, but the emotional ones too. The knowledge of how fragile everything was, how quickly circumstances could change, how poverty and lack of insurance could turn a medical emergency into an existential crisis. But she also thought about resilience, about family, about second chances, about the possibility of growth and change and healing. She thought about her mot, hers words that terrible night, and about all the words that had come after, the apologies and explanations, and slow rebuilding of trust. She thought about how easy it would have been to hold on to anger, to let that night define their relationship forever in negative terms. Instead, Elena had chosen something harder but ultimately more meaningful. She had chosen to see her mother as fully human, capable of both deep love and terrible mistakes. She had chosen to understand that forgiveness didn't mean condoning what had happened, but rather releasing the burden of carrying anger and resentment. And in doing so, she had not only saved her relationship with her mother, but had found her life's purpose: to help other families navigate impossible situations, to advocate for systems that didn't force parents to choose between their children's health and their financial survival, to be the kind of social worker who understood that people in crisis don't always make perfect choices, and that grace and compassion were just as important as practical help. Elena fell asleep thinking about the clients she would help in her new job starting next week, and about how she would carry the lessons of that summer night with her into every interaction, every case, every life she touched. The scars on her side had faded to pale silver lines, but the scars on her heart remained, a reminder of what she had survived and what she had learned. Not all scars were bad. Some marked the places where we had been broken and had chosen to heal stronger than before, and that was worth remembering, worth carrying forward, worth sharing with anyone who would listen. The story of a 16-year-old girl, a desperate mother, a generous aunt, and a terrified younger sister. The story of an accident that changed everything, and a choice that almost destroyed them, but ultimately taught them all what really mattered. The story of forgiveness and understanding, and the complicated, messy, beautiful reality of being human and loving each other despite our flaws. It was Elena's story. It was her family's story. And now, as she began her career helping others, it would become part of many more stories, a testament to the power of grace and second chances, and the strength that comes from facing the worst moments of our lives and choosing to move forward with compassion. That was the lesson of that terrible summer night. Not that her mother had said unforgivable things, but that nothing was truly unforgivable if there was love underneath, the fear, and a willingness to do better, be better, try harder next time. Elena carried that lesson with her always, a light in the dark moments, a reminder in the difficult ones, a promise that even when everything seemed broken beyond repair, healing was possible if we were brave enough to reach for it. And she did reach for it every single day, helping others find their own paths through impossible situations, offering the same grace and understanding that had once been offered to her. That was how a moment of crisis became a lifetime of purpose. That was how fear and desperation were transformed into wisdom and compassion. That was how a family survived the worst night of their lives and came out stronger on the other side. It wasn't a simple story or an easy one, but it was real, and in its reality lay its power and its truth. Elena's truth. A truth worth sharing, a truth worth living. And, as the months turned into years and Elena touched countless lives through her work, she never forgot where that journey had started. In a hospital room with a desperate mother, a generous aunt, a scared little sister, and a 16-year-old girl who chose understanding over anger and forgiveness over hate. That choice had made all the difference. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to hear more stories of resilience, family, and the power of forgiveness. Leave a comment below sharing your own experiences with difficult family situations or moments when you had to choose between anger and understanding. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.